Well, I was saying that this conception is trying to combine two aspects, two things. On the one hand, we have the tendency towards a transnational integration of capital and a totalizing integration produced by the operation of market forces. We have the concentration of capital. Competition leads to concentration of capital. Expansion worldwide implies even greater concentration and further expansion of capital. So this is a kind of totalizing, integrating process. On the other hand, and I would add to that we have to take into account this tendency towards a total, I would say, a universal subsumption under capital of labor and also nature and science. And that's very, very crucial. On the other side, as capital gets stronger, concentrates, and is more politically influential, or maybe it faces crisis and economic or social deadlocks, it tries to become more repressive, to become more, authoritarian and take back any civil rights or any rights of the working class. It maybe try to, like these days, we witness an assault, a neoliberal assault against the working class interests worldwide. And this is imposed by any means, by any social or political means, including violence, military and police violence and disciplination and all that. And this is the other aspect, the political or social totalitarianism. So the whole thing combines to this conception of totalitarian capitalism. First of all, I would say this, that I have personally experienced military agenda in Greece in the late 60s and early 70s. And in certain respects, what we face today is not less brutal than that. It's maybe more subtle, more inhumane, as the propaganda is more powerful, as the government and transnational capital has a greater and more effective means to repress people and impose this austerity policy against the people, against the working people.
Panelist has 20 minutes or so to run over by a few minutes if we need to, but we want to try to keep presentations relatively brief so that we have time for questions. So without further ado, we'll turn to Professor Liodakis.
Having not prepared any powerful or maybe powerless presentation, I'll try to orally highlight the main points of my paper, the type of duties in the program. I teach political economy at the Technical University of Crete in Greece. And by way of introduction, I would like to point out that amid an exacerbated and unprecedented crisis of world capitalism, there is a growing concern in redefining, under contemporary socio-economic conditions, a strategy for an emancipatory transcendence of the alienating, exploitative, and ecologically destructive capitalist mode of production. Revolutionary failures, and most significantly, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, have cast doubt on the efficacy of traditional socialist strategies. There is an urgent need, therefore, to rethink the revolutionary strategy theoretically and debate the new revolutionary perspectives in the early 21st century. Concerning the objective conditions, the second part of the paper is an exploration of the emerging new stage of capitalism, which I call totalitarian capitalism. As I have argued elsewhere, the transnational development of capitalist relations, which is an inherent tendency of the capitalist mode of production from its early stage of primitive accumulation, has further expanded during the stage of national constitution and imperialist internationalization of capital, to reach, with the rapid tendency towards globalization and transnational accumulation during recent decades, the new stage of totalitarian capitalism. The characterization of this emerging new stage of capitalism as totalitarian is meant to combine in one term the tendency for worldwide integration and universal subsumption under capital, with the increasingly repressive and authoritarian features which immanently stem from the inner structure of contemporary capitalism. Apart from qualitative changes, the new stage encompasses also serious qualitative changes concerning revolutionary changes in technology, a drastic restructuring, a reorganization of the capitalist relations of production, and a tendency towards a universal subsumption of labor, science, and nature under capital, as well as a drastic restructuring of economic institutions and power relations on a transnational level, including more specifically the drastic restructuring of state institutions at all levels. Within this context, an increasing network of international institutions and organizations making important decisions determining issues and processes which may concern not only an international or global level, but also any particular national formation, thus partly supplanting existing national states. On the other hand, the specific conditions of capitalist accumulation in any particular country or region are not determined anymore solely or mainly by the relevant nation states, but increasingly by the strategies of large transnational corporations and the decisions of transnational organizations and powerful imperial states. Despite this trend, we must particularly stress the increasingly uneven development of transnational capitalism and the continuing relevance of nation state, while simultaneously recognizing globalization as a dominant trend of contemporary capitalism and the increasing significance of a transnational capitalist state and constitution. The third section is about nation-state centrism and the transnational formation of the capital-state relation. The still prevalent nation-state centric approach should be broadly understood as a conception which sees national economies and institutional formations as the distinct organizational units, building blocks constituting the world economy, and the corresponding states as the container of society and a specific socio-political apparatus for the regulation of the national economy and the protection of national interests. As such, this conception is stressing national identity and common national interests while obscuring class divisions and contradictions. According to most nation-state centric approaches, the nation-state is treated in an ahistorical and metaphysical manner, and it is usually abstracted as an agent of political power from the material, socio-productive, and class forces that determine it, while the dialectical dynamic itself determining its historical reconstruction and evolution is also obscured. The state acquires a predominant role, and it is conceived that it ultimately determines both the directions of economic development and the terms of capitalist valorization, as well as the formation of social classes and the struggle between them. This mechanistic, instrumental, and metaphysical interpretation ends up broadly with an inversion of dialectical and historical materialism. I would argue instead that it is essentially capital as a social relations of production and the specific structure of capitalist relations that have historically determined the specific character of bourgeois state and continue to define its basic functions, its political mechanisms and orientations. There is enough evidence that social classes now tend to be formed on a transnational level. The nation state is changing, is being reconstructed, and in certain respects weakened, while at the same time the power of capital crystallized on a transnational level tends to form a hybrid contradictory structure which has been characterized as a transnational capitalist state. Recognizing the global character of capitalist social relations from the outset, we should stress that transnational relations developing through a transnational integration of capital play an increasingly important role and to a great extent will also determine the international relations between states. We should further stress that while the power of transnational capital is premised on a functional to capital territorial fragmentation of political rule, this fragmentation may also block effective solutions to the global problems associated with the historic globalization of capitalism. Although the conception of an emergent transnational capitalist state is corroborated by plenty of evidence, this is not, of course, one way, but rather a contradictory trend. In a nutshell, what we're arguing here is that the transnational dialectic for capitalist transformation is rapidly leading from a historical international system of nation states and the transnational forms and the traditional forms of nation state-centered class struggle to a transnational class formation, an emerging transnational state, and the rising significance of transnational class struggle and solidarity, insofar as revolutionary transcendence of capital requires an overthrow and a smash of state power, and transnationalization changes drastically the organization and the constitution of state power. The social and political ramifications of these changes are of great importance. The next section is about the transnational cooperation or conflict and the role of the state in revolution. Contrary to a dominant nation state view, there is a tendency towards a prevalence of transnational capitalist coordination and cooperation during recent decades. Inter-imperialist rivalry is outbalanced by ultra-imperialist cooperation between major powers. The dominant trend towards cooperation and transnational coordination of capital, but also the intensification of inter-capitalist competition and labor exploitation imply a serious aggravation of the basic contradiction between capital and labor. However, as the capital-labor class conflict is mediated by particular nation states and nationalist ideology, the revolutionary task of overthrowing and smashing the state apparatus at all levels, transnational, national, local, is obscure and complicated even further. In Marxist tradition and most revolutionary movements, taking over state power has been considered a crucial issue. Contrary to a utopian anarchist approach, a dominant Leninist tradition in the communist movement has stressed the need for a worker state during the early post-revolutionary period as a mechanism for the deeper and thorough transformation of society. Marx himself was arguably anti-state throughout. After the Paris Commune in particular, he carefully points out that the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and yield it for its own purposes. The experience of the 20th century and the collapse of the so-called existing socialism should problematize the relation between state and revolution even further. According to a recent critical account, revolution does not mean a seizure of power, it is a struggle against power, not for power. We should therefore transcend a strictly statist conception of revolution. In this sense, revolution should not be considered as a momentary event of taking state power or simply about the juridical ownership of the means of production, but as a social process of a total transformation of social relations. And communism should be considered not simply as a state of social organization, but mainly as a struggle for social emancipation, which does not come after the revolution, but rather evolves simultaneously with the revolution as one and the same process of negation and creation. Under present conditions, the revolutionary task of dismantling and overthrowing capitalist state institutions is clearly reasserted by the limitations of state, national state-centric approaches. The increasingly transnational regulation of economic and other policies, as well as the emerging transnational state, with all its enforcement mechanisms, make it imperative to challenge not just any particular nation state, but to dismantle the complex apparatus of the emerging transnational state. A national state-based class action cannot be sufficiently effective unless it can directly challenge transnational capital on the side where collective decision-making takes place, and unless it can effectively obstruct the implementation of such decisions and policies by coordinated joint class action across national borders. The next section is about the case of Greece as a case in point, confirming the trends observed on a transnational level. As in the case of other highly indebted countries, I will stress that the exacerbated problems facing Greece today are largely determined within a social context constituted through a tight network of transnational relations in which the country is entangled. It is illuminating here to highlight some important processes characteristic of contemporary capitalism, which reveal the increasingly transnational development and socialization of both production and distribution. These three processes concern the stock market, the socialization of business losses in periods of crisis, and the immense transfer of resources associated with a growing indebtedness and the servicing of this debt. All these processes essentially develop within a transnational terrain and imply, among other things, a colossal redistribution and transfer of resources from the working class and low-income groups to capital, encompassing also extensive transnational transfers of such resources. They also imply a formation or reconfiguration of social classes on a transnational level, as well as a serious aggravation of the country's fiscal debt, which is already augmented as a result, among other things, of the law of uneven development and the country's competitive handicap. The country has come under attack by transnational speculative capital and fallen into a notorious vicious circle of an augmented indebtedness and economic recession. This has implied an overwhelming determination of all major governmental policies by the so-called Troika as a condition for a bailout program. The whole process clearly reveals how transnational finance capital increasingly subsumes and expropriates the country's human and non-human natural resources. This implies an extensive expropriation of both working people and public property and encompasses not only increasing labor exploitation, increasing privatization and over-extraction of natural resources and environmental stress, but also a reinforcement of a process of primitive accumulation and accumulation by dispossession. This process also clearly implies a significant loss of national and popular sovereignty and an extensive shift from a national state to a transnational state regulation dominated by finance capital. Contrary to those political forces, including several on the left, who propose policies to face the country's problem along the nationalist defensive lines, an effective way to face the problem of indebtedness and to ensure a safe overcoming of capitalist crisis can only be ensured through class-struggle, solidarity, and a clearly anti-capitalist transnational action. The last section is an attempt towards outlining a class-based revolutionary strategy. Against capital's continued utilization of international conflicts and national ideologies to divide markets and ensure its reproduction, and contrary to a misleading nation-state-centric theoretical approach, our conceptualization of the emerging totalitarian capitalism and a relevant substantiation of working class internationalism contributes to a wage labor political economy and a revolutionary perspective. The new strategy should be clearly emancipated from both revolutionary states and the nation-state centrism of traditional strategies. And the emphasis would be, of course, on a political mobilization from below. The resistance of any people against any external aggression or imposition is, of course, still both legitimate and necessary. However, an obsessive attachment to a conception of imperialism as an external aggression and a nation-state, nation-centric approach more generally tend to focus attention rather misleadingly on inter-imperialist contradictions and a facade anti-imperialism, while usually associating the strategy of the working class movement narrowly with this protective anti-imperialism, or simply with the struggle against the war. Apart from methodological weaknesses noted above, the nation-centric approach has also serious ideological and political implications, as it fails to contribute to a reinforcement of internationalist class struggle against transnational capital as a whole, and by ignoring also the process constituting a transnational state, capital state, it fails to locate the crucial moments and the institutional framework within which substantial political decisions are made. A new revolutionary strategy of the working class movement, reconstituting a communist perspective, should be grounded not on inter-imperialist contradictions, but rather on the safe ground of the basic capital-labor contradiction and the prospect of its supersession. Such a strategy based on the capital-labor contradiction openly and directly brings to the forefront the issue of a thorough social emancipation and in irreversible transcendence of capitalism. In this sense, This new strategy contrasts not only with the ineffective anti-neoliberal strategy of the reformist left, but also with all those versions of left-wing reformism associated with an anti-monopoly strategy. The new strategy proposed stresses the need for a common and joint struggle across national borders without advocating a uniform and undifferentiated organization of the working class or a simultaneous class struggle around the globe. Note, however, that the most significant struggles of our epoch and most likely of the near future too cannot be fought on a transnational level. I then conclude that the new objective conditions of capitalism, but also the vicissitudes in the development of subjective conditions, make today the call of the Communist Manifesto, proletarians of all the world unite, far more realistic, compelling, and necessary than ever.